Well, a recent investigative report alleges there is massive and endemic corruption in South Sudan. A report by the Washington-based NAF project also says competitive corruption surrounding control of resources, particularly among military actors, has been a defining feature of South Sudan's system. Now, corruption has now shifted from being an integrated and self-sustaining system during the country's very brief economic boom period to being a disintegrative and self-destructive system in the wake of economic collapse. And a new United Nations report now directly links the government as well as the opposition to serious violations and abuses of international human rights law and violations of international humanitarian law. It says the pro-Riek Machar Sudan People's Liberation Army in opposition and the government Sudan People's Liberation Army have committed atrocities against civilians in the states of Buay and Tambura in western Equatoria between April and August 2018. Now, for more on what's going on in South Sudan, I'm joined by Ambassador Gordon Buay, Deputy Head of Mission at the Embassy of South Sudan. Welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you for having me.
So first, if we may quickly touch on the investigation, on this investigative reporting on corruption in South Sudan. As far as you know, what has the government been doing to stop the bleeding of this country, the corruption that is crippled South Sudan, which is benefiting both people who have now been in the opposition and even those in government?
Well, first of all, I would want to correct, because when people talk about corruption, you know, it has to be something tangible. For us, our government has been fighting corruption since before the independence. But you cannot just talk about corruption. The Central Report has a lot of weaknesses.
Yeah.
Number one, there are people they name, and then they cannot prove the allegations. For example, they name some leaders that they have looted money, they have houses, but even those reports were challenged. First of all, they cannot prove the bank accounts.
You know, you make a good point. It's a question of proof, and what you're saying, as long as somebody cannot prove something, then perhaps it's not happening. Truth is, across the continent of Africa, in also many countries where there's corruption, it is known that those who have access to power also have access to the purse. It is about stealing public finances. It's about being able to take away money that was meant for development. And many times, actually, it's the people in power who have access. Would you deny that actually government officials in South Sudan have stolen money that belongs to the public? Would you say all servants of the government of South Sudan, or people, or the politicians, are clean people, they don't steal from the public?
Well, what I'm saying, I'm just reiterating the position of our government.
Yeah.
I think you remember in 2011, our president came out and said that there are, because of the weak institutions, there were money that were not accounted for. But that one doesn't mean that there are individuals to be targeted that they have stolen money.
Yeah.
You know, before even we became independent, after now, we have very weak institutions.
Yes.
So we don't even, if you look at the states, there are states where people are being paid in cash because there are no banking system.
Yes.
Our banking system is the Kenyan banks, and then they are not in everywhere. You will find them in Juba. So the modern way of doing business is not yet...
so there are loopholes in the system which can facilitate corruption.
Yes.
In essence, stealing of government public funds.
But when people talk about the stealing, it's a different issue. Because when you said about the stealing, it means that somebody taking a large chunk of money for his private use. That one has to be proven.
There is evidence that money
has
been taken, in fact, sometimes directly from South Sudan to banks in Kenya and Uganda. Money has been invested in houses in Uganda, in Kenya, in Ethiopia, and many times by very high-ranking officials in the government and even men who are in the opposition. That's known. Some of these people, we know where they live. People know exactly where they live.
Okay, now when I think I will not talk on behalf of KCB, the Kenyan banks, because they can talk for themselves if there is something like that. But if it comes to properties, okay, who are the people with properties? If you look at the Inner Project report, last time they reported that Riek Machar has a house in Kenya. It happened that Riek Machar didn't have a house, he was only renting, which in that information is wrong. They also allege that our president has a house. Our president doesn't have a house in Kenya. He was also renting from somebody. So the problem with that, okay, there are two ways of proving corruption. Either you prove it in the bank accounts, in which in that case, if it is a report from KCB, it would make sense, or the properties within Kenya. And Kenya is very transparent.
But nevertheless, you can acknowledge there is corruption in government, and there are government officials who have been known to take money that didn't belong to them.
Well, I don't know those government officials as individuals, right?
But you know that. But
I agree that we have very weak institutions, yes, whereby the way we do things is not the modern way, because we are still a very young
question
country.
Here, we're talking about, there's a peace deal that was signed recently, and it was said that the political prisoners will be released. That hasn't happened. Why is not?
No, we released 20 political prisoners. The only people that have not been released, and I can name them, one is Peter Biara-Jack.
Yes.
Peter Biara-Jack, his arrest has nothing to do with the war. Or
he's an activist, actually.
He was not arrested because he was an activist. I can tell you, Peter Biara-Jack's father is the Major General and Director of Procurement of the SPLA. Yeah. His father-in-law is the Minister of Labor. His uncle is the Chief of Staff of the SPLA.
Samuel Duong.
We don't have Samuel Duong. We did not arrest Samuel Duong and Agri Idri. These individuals are not in South Sudan. Anybody with a question should direct those to Kenyan government, because they were in Kenya. They disappeared in Kenya. So we cannot be accused of arresting people who disappear in another country. That is not our responsibility. We don't have them in South Sudan. But Peter Biara-Jack was arrested because of other issues. He was caught at the airport with a gun. So he has to go, he will be taken to court. That one has nothing to do with politics. But all the war prisoners of war and political prisoners have been released. We released 20, and we welcome anybody to check them.
Well, we have so many reports that quite a number of people are still held on.
Okay, the issue of Carbino Wall. Carbino Wall is not a political prisoner.
He's a businessman.
He's a national security agent of our government. He's not only a businessman. He's even our soldier.
We'll have a longer conversation on this, Ambassador. And thank you very much. That's Ambassador Buay, Gordon Buay. He's the Deputy Head of Mission at the Embassy of the Republic of South Sudan here in Washington.